She came to restore a 100-year-old workshop for an anonymous client. Then a midnight storm ripped an oak from the earth and opened a hidden staircase. And what she awakened would drag a century of silence into daylight and put her name on every headline. 3 months earlier, Florence Thorne stood in the driveway of a dilapidated workshop house, squinting up at the weathered clapboard siding and sagging roofline. At 47, she'd restored dozens of historic buildings, but something about this place sent a peculiar chill down her spine. The commission had arrived through a lawyer. Anonymous client, triple her usual rate, no questions asked. Professionally, it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Personally, well, Florence couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen this place before. Behind her, a silver SUV pulled up, tires crunching on the gravel. Her 18-year-old daughter Valerie emerged, phone in hand, followed by Florence's 15-year-old son Caspian, his lanky frame hunched beneath the weight of his backpack. And then, stepping out from the driver's side, came Lysander Grimm, Valerie's 24-year-old boyfriend, whose perfect smile never quite reached his calculating eyes. "Mom, are you sure this is the right place?" Valerie wrinkled her nose as she surveyed the ramshackle structure, her sleek black hair, so like Florence's own before the gray had begun to streak through it, was pulled back in a neat ponytail that emphasized her delicate features. "It looks like something from a horror movie." Florence consulted the paperwork in her hand. 1924 Oak Ridge Workshop, originally built by Theodore Thorne Enterprises. She glanced up at the weathered sign, still barely visible above the door. "This is it." Lysander slid his arm around Valerie's waist. "It's fascinating, really. Buildings like this are time capsules." His British accent, which Florence had always suspected was affected. Who knows what treasures might be hidden inside? Florence tried not to frown. Something about the way Lysander looked at buildings, at everything, really, always unsettled her, like he was mentally calculating its value. "Let me take some initial photos," Florence said. "Caspian, can you start measuring the exterior?" "Valerie, there's a clipboard in my bag with the condition assessment forms." "I'll help, Val," Lysander offered. Florence watched them walk away, noting how Lysander's hand rested possessively on the small of her daughter's back. 6 months they'd been dating, after meeting at an antique fair where Valerie was helping Florence with a display of restored architectural elements. Lysander had introduced himself as an antique dealer, specializing in unusual historical artifacts. Florence had disliked him instantly, though she couldn't articulate why. The building's front door groaned as Florence pushed it open, releasing the musty scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that penetrated the grimy windows. The interior was a single large workspace with various workbenches, rusted tools still hanging on the walls, and what appeared to be an office area in the back. A rickety staircase led to a small loft area. "Cool," Caspian murmured. Unlike his sister, who had inherited Florence's dark features, Caspian took after their father with sandy hair and hazel eyes. "Is that a forge?" He pointed to a massive stone structure in one corner. "Good eye," Florence nodded. This was primarily a metalworking shop according to the documentation. The Thorne family made their fortune in industrial manufacturing, but this workshop was apparently for special projects. Caspian wandered toward the forge while Florence began her systematic documentation of the interior. She loved this part of her job, the methodical process of understanding a building's bones before beginning restoration. An hour into her assessment, Florence reached the office area. Unlike the rest of the space, which was cluttered with abandoned tools and materials, the office was nearly empty, just a desk with its drawers removed and a bare bookshelf. Someone had cleared it out long ago. "Find anything interesting?" Lysander's voice startled her. "Not yet," Florence replied. "The office has been emptied. Thoroughly. Shame," Lysander sighed. "Often the most valuable items are the paperwork, correspondence, ledgers, that sort of thing. They tell us who used the space, what they made, who they sold it to. He ran his fingers along the empty desk. History is just stories, after all. And stories have value. The way he said value made Florence's skin crawl. "Mom," Caspian's excited voice called from the main room. "Come look at this." Grateful for the interruption, Florence brushed past Lysander and found her son kneeling beside one of the workbenches, examining something he'd pried from a gap in the wall. "What did you find?" she asked. Caspian held up a yellowed piece of paper. It was stuffed into this crack, like someone hid it. It was a child's drawing, done in faded colored pencil. Primitive but recognizable shapes of elephants, lions, and what appeared to be acrobats on a high wire. Across the bottom, in childish scrawl, were the words, "For Papa Thorne, 1926. "A circus drawing," Florence murmured. Theodore Thorne must have had grandchildren who visited the workshop. Lysander appeared over her shoulder. "May I?" He plucked the drawing from her hands, studying it with narrowed eyes. Interesting. 1926 would have been during the golden age of traveling circuses in America. "My great-grandfather would have been running the family business then," Florence said. "Theodore Thorne. I don't know much about him, honestly. My father didn't talk about that side of the family often." "Thorne?" Lysander's head snapped up. "You're a Thorne by blood? I thought it was your married name." "No, I kept my maiden name after the divorce," Florence explained. "My ex-husband is Carmichael." "Fascinating," Lysander murmured. "You should keep this safe. Historical ephemera, especially items related to circuses, can be quite valuable to collectors." The rest of the afternoon passed in routine documentation. Florence took measurements and photographs, noting structural issues and making preliminary restoration plans. Valerie and Caspian helped, though Valerie spent more time texting than working. Lysander hovered, asking questions about the building's history that Florence couldn't answer. "We should head back to town," Florence announced. "We can get rooms at that inn we passed and come back tomorrow. I want to check the foundation more thoroughly, especially around that northwest corner where the settling is the worst." "About that," Lysander said, "I've taken the liberty of making other arrangements. My family owns a vacation property just 20 minutes from here. Plenty of room for everyone, much more comfortable than some quaint but undoubtedly musty inn." Florence opened her mouth to decline, but Valerie jumped in. "Mom, please? Lysander showed me pictures. It's gorgeous, and it has a hot tub." "Sounds better than a motel," Caspian added. Outnumbered, Florence reluctantly agreed. They locked up the workshop and followed Lysander's SUV down increasingly remote country roads until they reached an elegant, modern house nestled among towering pines. The vacation property turned out to be a luxurious 3-bedroom home, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a densely wooded valley. Everything was sleek, expensive, and impersonal, not a family photo or personal touch in sight. "My parents rarely use it," Lysander explained. "They prefer the property in the Hamptons. I come here occasionally when I'm sourcing items in this region." "It's amazing," Valerie breathed. "It's very generous of you," Florence managed. Antique dealing must be more profitable than she'd realized. Or perhaps Lysander had family money. Either way, the disparity between his resources and theirs was just one more thing that made Florence uneasy about his relationship with her daughter. That night, after a dinner of delivered gourmet pizza Lysander knew just the place, Florence sat on the deck watching lightning illuminate the distant hills. The storm was moving in faster than forecast, the wind already whipping the pine branches into a frenzy. Caspian joined her. "This place is intense," he said. "Lysander must be loaded." "Seems that way. Val's really into him," Caspian continued. "Like obsessively into him." "I've noticed," Florence sighed. "What do you think of him?" Caspian considered this. "He's, I don't know, smooth. Too smooth, maybe. Like he's always performing." He shrugged. "But Val doesn't listen to me. I'm just her annoying little brother. You're observant, that's all. It's a good quality." A particularly vivid flash of lightning was followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. "Storm's right on top of us," Florence noted. "We should go in." The power went out around midnight, plunging the house into darkness pierced only by the violent flashes of lightning. Florence lay awake in the guest room, listening to the howling wind and torrential rain battering the roof. Something about the storm felt personal, as if nature itself was responding to their presence at the workshop. Morning brought eerie calm and devastation. Trees were down across the property, and the road back to the workshop was partially flooded. Lysander, looking remarkably put together despite the night's disruptions, appeared with coffee and pastries from some unknown source. "I ventured out early," he explained. "Thought everyone could use a proper breakfast after that tempest." "The road to the workshop?" Florence asked. "Passable, though barely," Lysander replied. "I drove by on my way back. There's quite a spectacular fallen oak near the building. Missed it by inches, fortunately." They ate quickly and headed out, Caspian riding with Florence while Valerie went with Lysander. The landscape was transformed. Branches and debris scattered across the roads, puddles the size of small ponds in every depression. When they reached the workshop, Florence gasped. An enormous oak, easily 100 years old, had been struck by lightning and toppled. Its massive root system had been wrenched from the earth, creating a jagged crater at the northwest corner of the building, precisely where Florence had noted the settling issues the day before. "Holy!" Caspian breathed, jumping out of the car before Florence had fully stopped. "Careful," she called. "The ground could be unstable." They approached the fallen giant cautiously. The workshop itself appeared largely undamaged. The tree had indeed missed the structure by mere feet. But the upheaval of the root system had torn away a section of earth directly adjacent to the foundation, revealing something unexpected. "Mom," Caspian pointed, his voice hushed. Florence edged closer, heart quickening. Where the earth had been ripped away, a set of wooden steps was visible, descending into darkness beneath the workshop's foundation. "A cellar?" she murmured, though it didn't look like any root cellar she'd encountered in her years of restoration work. The stairs were wide, solidly constructed, and appeared to lead to some kind of underground room or passageway. Lysander's SUV pulled up, and he and Valerie joined them at the edge of the crater. Well, Lysander's voice held an odd note. "Looks like the storm has revealed a secret." He pulled out his phone and began taking photographs. "What are you doing?" Florence asked. "Documenting the discovery," Lysander replied. "For insurance purposes, of course. Your client would want everything properly recorded." "We don't even know what it is yet," Florence said, "and I'm responsible for documentation." "Of course," Lysander tucked his phone away. "Shall we investigate? I have flashlights in my car." Every professional instinct told Florence to proceed with caution, to secure the site, to consult structural engineers before entering any previously unknown space. But another instinct, deeper and less rational, urged her forward. This was why she'd been brought here. This was what she was meant to find. "Caspian, get the heavy-duty flashlights from my equipment bag," she said. "And everyone put on hard hats. If we're doing this, we're doing it safely." 20 minutes later, properly equipped, Florence led the way down the exposed stairs. The wood creaked but held firm under their weight. These steps had been built to last. At the bottom, a short earthen passageway led to what appeared to be a heavy wooden door, now partially ajar. Florence shone her flashlight through the gap, revealing a glimpse of what lay beyond. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mom?" Valerie whispered behind her. "What is it?" With trembling hands, Florence pushed the door fully open, and their flashlight beams cut through a century of darkness. Before them stretched an underground chamber roughly the size of a basketball court, its ceiling supported by massive timber beams. And within this buried vault was something none of them could have imagined. 3 ornate wooden wagons, their painted surfaces still vibrant despite the decades of darkness. Elaborate scrollwork framed panels depicting exotic animals and daring acrobats. Tarnished brass lanterns hung from decorative hooks. Folded canvas tarps lay in neat piles alongside coiled ropes and wooden stakes. "It's a circus," Florence whispered. "Not just any circus." Lysander stepped forward, his voice taut with an emotion Florence couldn't identify. He directed his light toward the largest wagon, where gold lettering spelled out, "Stellarmain Brothers Traveling Wonder Show, 1926. "The same year as the drawing," Caspian murmured. Florence moved deeper into the chamber, her restoration expert's eye cataloging what she saw. Beyond the wagons lay what appeared to be living quarters, simple cots arranged in rows, trunks at their feet. In another area, performance equipment, trapezes, balance beams, hoops, and everywhere, personal belongings, hairbrushes with strands still caught in the bristles, tin cups on makeshift tables, a child's doll propped against a pillow. "It's like they just vanished," Valerie said. "Left everything behind." "Or never left at all," Caspian added quietly. A chill ran down Florence's spine at her son's words. The underground chamber did have an unsettling quality, not just of preservation, but of interruption, as if the life that had animated these objects had been suddenly violently halted. Lysander had made his way to one of the smaller wagons, and was examining it with intense focus. A desk was covered with papers, ledgers, and correspondence, all perfectly preserved in the cool, dry underground environment. The side panel bore the words, "Cabinet of Curiosities," above paintings of strange creatures and human oddities. "The sideshow wagon," he murmured, more to himself than the others. "Extraordinary conditions." She picked up a leather-bound book and carefully opened it. Florence approached the largest wagon, which appeared to be some kind of office or administrative space. Inside, in elegant handwriting, was a list of names under the heading Stellarmain Brothers Company Roster, Winter Quarters, 1926. Her eyes scanned the entries. The list continued. Some 30 names in all, including animal handlers, musicians, roustabouts, and other performers. Florence's blood ran cold. "Theodore Thorne." "Lysander," she called. "You seem to know about circuses." At the bottom was a note, "Winter Quarters kindly provided by Mr. Theodore Thorne of Thorne Enterprises." Would it be normal for one to winter underground? Lysander appeared at her side too quickly. "Never underground." He reached for the book. "Absolutely not," he said. "Circuses typically wintered in barns, warehouses, or permanent quarters in warmer states." "May I?" Florence hesitated, then handed it over. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Satisfaction? "Fascinating," he murmured. "So your great-grandfather hosted this circus for the winter of 1926. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "And then they vanished, it seems. Every last one of them." "Mom," Caspian called. "I found something else." The way he said it, clinical, almost pleased, sent another chill through Florence. They followed his voice to a narrow passage leading off the main chamber. "Dr. Magnus Grimm, circus physician," Caspian read, "daily record of health and treatment." It opened into a smaller room that contained what was unmistakably medical equipment, an examination table, cabinets of bottles and instruments, and a desk with more ledgers. Lysander stepped forward sharply. "Did you say Grimm?" "Yeah." Caspian showed him the ledger. "Looks like he was the circus doctor." A strange expression crossed Lysander's face. "How interesting," he said softly. "A coincidence, I'm sure." But Florence didn't believe in coincidences of this magnitude. Lysander Grimm, with his convenient connection to Valerie, his knowledge of antiques, his family's property near this specific workshop, and now a Dr. Grimm associated with a circus that had vanished while staying on Theodore Thorne's property. Her restoration instincts were rapidly being overridden by something more primal, a protectiveness toward her children, and a growing certainty that they had stumbled into something dangerous. "I think we need to document everything methodically," she announced, "and we should contact local authorities. This is a significant historical find that needs proper handling." "Let's not be hasty," Lysander countered. This is private property, and your client specifically requested discretion. Perhaps we should first catalog the artifacts ourselves, assess their historical and financial value. These aren't just artifacts, Florence said firmly. This was someone's life, dozens of people's lives. She gestured around them. This isn't normal, Lysander. Circuses don't disappear underground with all their belongings intact. Perhaps they abandoned it, he suggested. Financial troubles, perhaps. The circus business was notoriously unstable. And left everything? Florence challenged. Personal items? Children's toys? Valerie, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. I don't like it down here, she said. It feels wrong, like we're disturbing something that should have stayed buried. For once, Florence agreed completely with her daughter. We're going back up, she decided. I need to contact my client about this discovery. But, Lysander began. Now, Florence said firmly. As they made their way back to the stairs, Florence noticed Lysander lingering by the sideshow wagon, his hand aggressing the ornate woodwork with unsettling intimacy. When he thought no one was looking, he slipped something small into his pocket. Outside, in the harsh light of day, the discovery seemed almost dreamlike. Had they really found a perfectly preserved circus buried beneath a workshop? What now? Valerie asked. Now I call my client, Florence said. But when she dialed the lawyer who had hired her, the response was unexpected. Miss Thorne, the crisp voice said after she explained their discovery. Your client anticipated you might find something of historical interest. They ask that you continue your work and document everything thoroughly. They will send Ferdinand funds to cover any extra expenses. But there's an entire circus down there, Florence pressed. Possibly with historical and legal implications. Shouldn't we notify authorities? Your client prefers discretion at this stage, the lawyer replied. Document everything, secure the site, and proceed with restoration of the workshop above. Further instructions will follow. After hanging up, Florence relayed the conversation to the others, omitting her growing suspicions about the anonymous client's identity and intentions. Perfect, Lysander said. We'll create a proper inventory of everything below. I have contacts in the antique world who specialize in circus memorabilia. They could help assess the historical significance. No outside contacts yet, Florence said firmly. Of course, methodical as always, Florence. They spent the rest of the day securing the site, boarding up the exposed stairway entrance and ensuring the workshop was locked. Florence insisted they all stay at a motel in town rather than returning to Lysander's isolated house, citing the need for reliable internet to research their find. That night, after Valerie and Caspian were asleep in the adjoining room, Florence began searching online for information about the Stellar-Main Brothers Traveling Wonder Show. There wasn't much. A few mentions in digitized newspapers from the 1920s, advertisements for performances in small towns across the Midwest. The last reference she could find was from January 1926, announcing the circus would be wintering in private quarters before resuming their tour in the spring. But the spring tour never happened. After January 1926, the Stellar-Main Brothers circus simply vanished from the historical record. Florence turned her attention to her own family history. Theodore Thorne had been a prominent businessman and industrial magnate in the 1920s. His company had manufactured everything from farm equipment to specialized metalwork for construction projects. He'd been known as a shrewd but fair businessman, a pillar of the community, and a generous donor to local causes. Nothing in his public profile suggested any connection to a traveling circus, let alone any explanation for why one would be buried beneath his workshop. As dawn broke, Florence had made one decision. She needed to visit the local historical society. The Millfield Historical Society occupied a Victorian mansion on the edge of town, its rooms converted into exhibition spaces and archives. Florence arrived when they opened at 9 a.m., having left Caspian and Valerie at the motel with instructions to organize their photos and notes from the previous day. She had deliberately not told Lysander where she was going. The elderly woman at the reception desk looked up as Florence entered, her spectacles magnifying kind blue eyes. "Can I help you, dear?" "I hope so," Florence replied. "I'm researching local history from the 1920s, specifically anything related to the Stellarmain brothers' traveling wonder show. They apparently wintered here in early 1926. The woman's hands stilled on the visitor log she'd been pushing toward Florence. "Stellarmain," she repeated softly. "My goodness, I haven't heard that name in many years. You know about them? I'm Cordelia Ashworth. I've been the Society's librarian for 30 years, but I'm not quite old enough to remember 1926 firsthand. However, my grandmother used to tell stories." She hesitated. "Perhaps you should come with me to the archives." Cordelia led Florence through the museum's main floor, past displays of agricultural tools and photographs of the town's founding families, and down a narrow staircase to a basement level lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves. "We keep our more sensitive materials down here," Cordelia explained. "Not everything makes it into the upstairs exhibits. History isn't always pretty, you know." "I'm beginning to realize that." Cordelia extracted a thin folder labeled Local Legends and Unverified Accounts and placed it on a reading table. "My grandmother was a young woman in 1926, she said. She worked as a seamstress at Madame Beaumont's shop on Main Street. That winter she was commissioned to make repairs to some elaborate costumes, circus costumes." Florence leaned forward eagerly as Cordelia removed several items from the folder. Handwritten notes, a few newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be pages from a personal diary. "The Stellarmain brothers brought their circus to town in November 1925, Cordelia continued. "They performed for 2 weeks to great acclaim. My grandmother attended twice. She said it was magical. Then, instead of moving on as traveling shows typically did, they announced they would winter locally, on property owned by Theodore Thorne. My great-grandfather." Cordelia's eyebrows rose. "Your Thorne? Well, that explains your interest." She studied Florence for a moment, then continued. "According to official records, the circus departed town in early March 1926, leaving behind substantial unpaid debts to local merchants. Theodore Thorne himself made statements to the newspaper about having been deceived by the unscrupulous carnival folk." She pushed forward one of the yellowed newspaper clippings. The headline read, "Circus Skips Town. Local businessmen left to settle accounts." "But your grandmother believed something else happened," Florence prompted. She said, "There was something wrong about the whole affair. The circus folk had become part of the community over those winter months. The acrobats gave lessons to local children. The fortune teller, Magdalena Stellarmain, was known for her generosity despite the troupe's supposedly precarious finances. My grandmother had become friendly with several of the performers while mending their costumes." She tapped another document, a page of handwritten text that appeared to be from a personal diary. "My grandmother wrote that in February several of the circus performers fell mysteriously ill. There were rumors of food poisoning or even a contagious disease. Theodore Thorne announced that he had arranged for quarantine facilities for the affected individuals. Then, almost overnight, the entire circus was gone." "Gone where?" Florence asked. "That's just it," Cordelia said. "No one knew. They simply vanished. But my grandmother—" She lowered her voice. "My grandmother always believed they never left town at all. She said she overheard 2 of Thorne's men talking about sealing it up tight, and no one will ever know." Florence felt a chill run down her spine. The underground chamber they'd discovered, with its preserved wagons and personal belongings, suddenly took on a more sinister aspect. It wasn't a storage facility. It was a tomb. "There's where," Cordelia continued. "Within months of the circus's supposed departure, Theodore Thorne's business expanded dramatically. He acquired new properties, including land that had previously belonged to a Dr. Magnus Grimm, who left town abruptly around the same time." "Grimm? Yes, he was apparently the physician who treated the circus performers when they fell ill. My grandmother's diary mentions him several times. She didn't trust him, said he had eyes like a snake. Florence's mind was racing. Lysander Grimm, the circus physician's surname, couldn't be a coincidence. And Theodore Thorne's sudden prosperity after the circus vanished suggested something far more disturbing than unpaid debts. "There's one more thing you should see," Cordelia said. She withdrew a brittle, brown-edged photograph. This was taken at the Founders' Day celebration in May 1926, just 2 months after the circus supposedly left town. The photograph showed a group of well-dressed men posed on the steps of what appeared to be the town hall. In the center stood a distinguished-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard. Theodore Thorne, Florence assumed. And at his right hand was a tall, thin man with sharp features and deep-set eyes. Dr. Magnus Grimm, Cordelia confirmed. Still very much in town, despite reports of his departure. And look at what he's wearing. Florence peered closer and felt her blood run cold. On Dr. Grimm's lapel was a distinctive pin, an ornate S intertwined with what appeared to be a small star. "The stellar main emblem," Cordelia said quietly. "My grandmother recognized it from the circus costumes she had mended. Dr. Grimm was wearing it like a trophy. Your grandmother believed Theodore Thorne and Dr. Grimm did something to the circus performers. She believed they never left town," Cordelia corrected gently. "And after they disappeared, both Thorne and Grimm prospered considerably." "Or valuable property," Cordelia added meaningfully. "Circus equipment, exotic animals, specialized tools, all would have been worth a considerable sum in 1926, especially if no one was looking for them." "May I make copies of these materials?" Florence asked. And now, a century later, she was being paid by an anonymous client to restore the very building beneath which those crimes had been concealed. Nothing about this was coincidental. The question was, who was the client, and what did they want her to find? When Florence returned to the motel, she found Caspian alone in the room, organizing their photographs on his laptop. "Actually, yeah, I was enhancing some of the shots of the circus wagons, and I noticed something on the sideshow wagon." He zoomed in on an image. "See this panel? Magnus Grimm's continued presence in town, wearing what appeared to be a trophy from the vanished circus." "You think our great-great-grandfather murdered them?" Caspian asked. "I think something terrible happened," Florence replied carefully. "And I think Lysander Grimm knows more than he's telling us. The coincidence is too great. His family name, his interest in antiques, his appearance in our lives just as I received this anonymous commission." "You think he's related to Dr. Grimm from 1926? "I think it's likely," Florence said. "And I think he's been looking for the circus all along." They arrived at the workshop to find Lysander's SUV already parked outside. Florence's heart sank. He'd brought Valerie back here, possibly to search for something specific now that he knew the circus's location. "Stay behind me," she instructed Caspian as they approached the building. "And if anything seems wrong, you run to the car and call 911. Understand?" Caspian nodded, his expression serious beyond his 15 years. The workshop door was unlocked. Inside, Florence could hear voices from the direction of the exposed stairway. Lysander's smooth, cultured tones and Valerie's higher pitch, sounding uncertain. "I just don't understand why we couldn't wait for Mom," Valerie was saying as Florence and Caspian entered. "Your mother is being overly cautious," Lysander replied. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, Val. Do you have any idea what these artifacts are worth to collectors? We need to document everything before your mother involves bureaucrats who'll tie everything up for years." "Valerie," Florence called, making both of them turn. Lysander was holding a crowbar, and the boards they'd used to secure the underground entrance had been pried away. "Mom!" Valerie looked guilty, but relieved. Lysander wanted to take more detailed photographs of the wagons. "I'm sure he did," Florence said. "Val, come over here, please." Something in her tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Valerie immediately moved away from Lysander, crossing to stand beside her mother and brother. "Florence," Lysander said smoothly, setting down the crowbar and spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I was just explaining to Valerie the historical significance of what we've found. As an antique dealer specializing in unusual items, I have contacts who would be fascinated by a collection of artifacts stolen from murdered circus performers." Lysander's expression froze. "I beg your pardon. The Stellarmain brothers' circus didn't abandon their equipment and skip town," Florence said. "They were trapped underground by Theodore Thorne and Dr. Magnus Grimm, your ancestor, I presume." A new expression crossed Lysander's face, something cold and calculating that made Florence instinctively step in front of her children. "You've been busy this morning," he said. "Finding old gossip at the Historical Society, I assume? How quaint." "How quaint. Mom, what's he talking about?" Valerie whispered. "Your boyfriend has been using you, Val," Florence said, "to get to me, to this commission, to this workshop. His family has been searching for the circus for generations, haven't they, Lysander? The ultimate collection of Stellarmain memorabilia, worth millions to the right buyers." "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said. "The Stellarmain Circus was a second-rate traveling show that fell on hard times and abandoned their equipment." Rachel, a determined journalist, walks into the dimly lit, cluttered office of Victor, an investigative reporter. He looks up, his eyes sharp and guarded. Rachel extends a hand, a folder tucked under her arm. "I'm Rachel. I think I have something you'll want to see." Victor's gaze flickers to the folder, a hint of intrigue replacing his earlier wariness. He gestures to the chair opposite him, a silent invitation. "I'm going to properly document everything we find, and then I'm going to let my client decide what happens next." "I don't think you understand the situation, Florence. My family has been searching for the Stellarmain collection for 3 generations. We've invested considerable resources tracking down every lead, every rumor. When I learned a Thorne descendant had received a commission to restore Theodore's workshop, I knew we were close. So you seduced my daughter to get to me. I befriended Valerie because she provided access," Lysander corrected, as if the distinction mattered. "She's a lovely girl, but ultimately a means to an end." "You bastard," Caspian muttered. Valerie's face had gone white. You used me all this time?" "Don't be dramatic, Val," Lysander said dismissively. "We had fun together, and you could still benefit from all this if your mother would be reasonable." "Get out," Florence said quietly. "Get out now, before I call the police and report you for trespassing and attempted theft of historical artifacts. We'll continue this discussion later, when you've had time to think more rationally," he said. "In the meantime, I suggest you consider what's truly at stake. Your family legacy is as tarnished as mine by what lies beneath this workshop. The only question is whether we profit from it or let it destroy us both." With that, he walked out, leaving an oppressive silence behind him. "Mom," Valerie's voice was small, hurt. "Is it true about Lysander?" "I'm so sorry, Val. I should have trusted my instincts about him from the beginning. But all the things he said about the circus people, about great-great-grandpa Thorne, is that true too? I don't know for certain yet, but the evidence suggests something terrible happened here and our family was involved." "What do we do now?" Caspian asked. "Now we do our jobs. We document everything properly, secure the site, and report our findings to the client as contracted." "And if Lysander comes back?" Valerie asked. "We'll deal with that if it happens," Florence assured her. "But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, which means a proper, systematic exploration of what's down there." They spent the rest of the day documenting the underground chamber, photographing every wagon, trunk, and personal item. Florence insisted they wear gloves and disturb as little as possible, treating the space with respect due to both a historical site and what she increasingly suspected was a mass grave. In the administrative wagon, Florence found more ledgers and correspondence. Most were routine business matters, booking venues, ordering supplies, paying performers. But in a hidden compartment beneath the wagon's desk, she discovered a personal diary with the name Magdalena Stellermain embossed on the leather cover. With trembling hands, she opened it, finding pages of elegant handwriting detailing the daily life of the circus. The final entries told a chilling story. The 10th of February, 1000. 926 Theodore Thorne commissioned a private performance for his business associates next week. The fee is generous, though his manner remains cold. Marcus believes this could lead to patronage that would secure our company's future, but I sense something amiss. Doctor. Grimm visits too often, asking questions about our equipment, our animals, our routes. His interest seems beyond medical concern for our well-being.
February 15th, 1926. Disaster. The private performance went well, but afterward, several of our company fell violently ill. Coriolanus, the Weiss family. 2 of our roustabouts. Dr. Grimm diagnosed food poisoning from the refreshments and is treating them, but I mistrust his remedies. They seem to worsen rather than improve. Marcus confronted Thorne, suggesting the food at his event poisoned our people. Thorne was enraged by the accusation. February 18th, 1926. More have fallen ill. Thorne claims concern about contagion spreading to the town and has ordered us to remain at the winter quarters. Marcus planned to leave tomorrow, ill performers or not, but this evening Thorne arrived with men carrying guns. They are quarantining us, moving everyone into the underground storage area that Thorne had constructed beneath the workshop. I am writing this by candlelight. The healthy among us have been separated from the sick, but we are all underground now. Lucius tried to resist and was beaten severely. The children are terrified. I fear Thorne and Grimm have planned this all along. February 20th, 1926. 2 days in this underground prison. The illness grew worse. I suspect deliberate poisoning now, not accidental. Grimm administers medicine that seems to hasten decline. Thorne has men guarding the entrance. They bring food and water, but not enough. My niece Luna, always clever, has found a small space behind one of the wagons where she hides when the guards come down. She has been documenting everything in sketches and notes. If anyone finds this, know that the Stellermain brothers' traveling wonder show did not abandon our equipment or leave unpaid debts, as I suspect Thorne will claim. We were imprisoned and poisoned by Theodore Thorne and Dr. Magnus Grimm, who coveted our property and equipment. February 22nd, 1926. I am the last one writing now. Most are too weak. The guards come down less frequently. Yesterday, I overheard them discussing sealing it up once we are all finished. Luna still hides. She is our only hope. If anyone finds this, know that we were loved. We had names, and we deserved better than to be erased from history by greedy men. The final entry was dated February 24th, 1926. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. Luna has taken all my records and hidden them where Thorne's men won't find them. She is our witness now. If she cannot escape, at least she might be found someday, along with the truth. The air grows stale. I hear hammering above. They are sealing us in. Florence closed the diary, her hands shaking. The horror of what had happened here. People systematically poisoned, imprisoned, and left to die was almost too much to comprehend. And her own blood ancestor had been responsible. Mom? Valerie's voice broke through her thoughts. What did you find? Florence looked up at her children, their young faces concerned. How could she share such horror with them? I found Magdalena Stellermain's diary, she said quietly. It confirms what I feared. Theodore Thorne and Dr. Grimm deliberately poisoned and imprisoned the circus company. They sealed them underground and left them to die. Valerie's hand flew to her mouth. All of them? Even the children? According to this, one person might have escaped or hidden. A young aerialist named Luna Stellermain. She was Magdalena's niece. Rachel stood before the imposing data server. her reflection distorted in its mirrored surface. This was it. The cool hum of the machinery was a constant companion, a rhythm to her racing heart. She remembered her father's words, "The truth is always there, Rachel. You just have to know where to look." With a deep breath, she initiated the sequence. Lines of code cascaded down the screen. Across town, Victor felt a tremor in his carefully constructed world. His systems were alerting. Rachel watched, her heart pounding as the progress bar crept forward. Each percentage point felt like an eternity. Victor knew this signature. It was Rachel's. He clenched his jaw, rage simmering beneath his calm facade. Finally, the screen flashed, displaying the decrypted files. A name stood out, stark against the dark background. Project Chimera. He picked up his phone, his voice a low growl. "Find Rachel, now." Rachel printed the documents, the soft whirring of the printer echoing in the silent room. The truth, finally, in her hands. "Details we can manage," Lysander replied dismissively. "Now, where is Magdalena Stellermain's diary? And any other documentation you've found? Hand it over and perhaps we can still reach an amicable arrangement." "There's nothing amicable about murder, Lysander. Not in 1926, and not now. I had hoped you would be reasonable." He turned to his associates. "Search the chamber, find the children and any documents they've collected." As the men moved to obey, Florence made a split-second decision. She stepped backward toward the far wall of the chamber, drawing attention away from where Valerie and Caspian were hidden. "You're just like him, aren't you?" she called Lysander. "Magnus Grimm, willing to destroy lives for profit. Did your family pass down more than just the search for the circus? Did they pass down the capacity for murder too?" "He salvaged them for science. He stole them," Florence corrected, "after poisoning their owners. My great-grandfather was a medical pioneer who recognized the value of what these carnival charlatans possessed. The Stellermain collection contains medical curiosities and specimens that would have been wasted in the hands of sideshow barkers." While she kept Lysander talking, she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. Caspian was slowly edging toward the stairs, pulling Valerie with him. If they could reach the surface, they could get help. "Property?" Florence repeated incredulously. "These were people, Lysander. They had names, lives, children. Your great-grandfather and mine murdered them and stole everything they had. There's no statute of limitations on understanding that horror." "The past is irrelevant," Lysander snapped. "What matters is the present, and presently you are interfering with property that rightfully belongs to my family." One of Lysander's men called Mr. Grimm. "Someone's been in the sideshow wagon. The specimen cabinet has been opened." Lysander's attention shifted momentarily, giving Caspian and Valerie a few more precious seconds to move toward the stairs. Florence needed to keep Lysander distracted. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. "Looking for something specific in that wagon, Lysander?" she asked loudly. "Something particularly valuable or particularly incriminating?" "I think I do," Florence pressed. "Luna Stellermain documented everything. Every detail of what your great-grandfather and mine did. She was thorough. Sketches, dates, names, even saved a Stellermain pin, identical to the one Magnus wore after the murders. Where is Luna's evidence?" "Somewhere safe," Florence replied. One of Lysander's men shouted, "There, the kids." Everything happened at once. Lysander lunged for Florence, grabbing her documentation bag. Florence fought to keep hold of the bag, knowing it contained the only evidence of what had truly happened to the Stellermain circus. His men raced toward the stairs where Caspian and Valerie were now running full tilt toward the surface. In the struggle, Lysander shoved Florence hard against one of the support beams. The ancient wood, already weakened by a century of bearing weight, cracked ominously. A shower of dirt and small stones rained down from the ceiling. "The support," Florence gasped. "The whole structure could collapse." Lysander paused. Florence seized the opportunity to wrench her bag free and dashed toward the stairs. Above, she could hear Caspian and Valerie shouting for help. At least they had made it out. But Lysander was quick. He grabbed Florence's ankle as she reached the bottom of the stairs, sending her sprawling. The contents of her bag spilled out, including Magdalena's diary and Luna's metal box. At last, Lysander breathed. Another support beam cracked with a sound like a gunshot. More dirt and debris showered down as the ceiling began to sag in places. Lysander's men were backing toward the stairs, looking nervously at the deteriorating structure. "Mr. Grimm, we need to get out," one of them urged. Lysander ignored him, focused entirely on gathering the scattered papers and the diary. Florence scrambled to her feet, lunging for Luna's metal box, just as a larger section of ceiling collapsed between them. "Mom!" Valerie's terrified voice called from above. Florence clutched the metal box to her chest and turned toward the stairs. Behind her, Lysander was still gathering papers, oblivious to the increasing danger as more supports began to fail. "Lysander, leave it," she shouted. He looked up, his face twisted with obsession. "I've searched too long," he snarled. "I won't leave without—" His words were cut off by a thunderous crack as one of the main support beams gave way completely. A cascade of earth and timbers came down, separating Florence from Lysander. She emerged into the workshop to find Caspian on his phone, calling 911 while Valerie stood at the top of the stairs, reaching for her. "Mom, hurry!" She had no choice but to run for the stairs, the metal box clutched tight against her chest. Florence scrambled up the last few steps just as a final, devastating collapse sent a cloud of dust billowing up from below. The underground chamber, which had preserved its secrets for a century, was sealing itself once more, this time with Lysander Grimm inside. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency vehicles, police questioning, and growing media attention. The collapse of the underground chamber had trapped Lysander and his associates beneath tons of dirt and timber. Rescue crews worked frantically to reach them, while police secured the perimeter and began taking statements. Florence sat with Valerie and Caspian in the back of an ambulance, shock blankets around their shoulders as she recounted their discovery and the confrontation with Lysander. She handed over Luna's metal box and Magdalena's diary to a detective, explaining their historical significance and the evidence they contained of century-old crimes. "So you saying this man, Lysander Grimm, threatened you when you refused to help him steal historical artifacts," the detective clarified. "Yes," Florence confirmed. "He brought those men to intimidate us and take the evidence by force. When we resisted, there was a struggle, and the support beams gave way. And you believe these documents prove that your great-grandfather and Lysander's great-grandfather murdered an entire circus company in 1926. The diary entries are explicit, so are Luna Stellarmane's sketches and notes. There are also bills of sale showing Theodore Thorne and Dr. Magnus Grimm profiting from the circus equipment after the performers were gone. We'll need experts to authenticate these materials, of course, and the underground chamber itself will need proper archaeological investigation once it's stabilized." "What about Lysander?" Valerie asked. The detective's expression softened. "Rescue crews are still working, but I have to be honest, the collapse was extensive. We're doing everything possible, but it may take days to reach them." Florence pulled her children closer, feeling the weight of the day's revelations and dangers. She had discovered a shameful truth about her ancestry and nearly lost her own life and her children's to the same pattern of greed and violence that had claimed the Stellarmane circus a century earlier. "There's one more thing," she told the detective. "I was hired anonymously through a lawyer to restore this workshop. Triple my usual fee with instructions to document everything thoroughly. Now I'm wondering if my client somehow knew what was buried here." "We'll want that lawyer's information," the detective replied. As evening fell, rescue efforts continued under floodlights. The media had arrived in force, drawn by initial reports of historical artifacts and trapped individuals. Florence kept her children away from the cameras, declining all requests for interviews. The police had taken the diary and Luna's evidence for safekeeping, promising to have experts examine them as soon as possible. Florence called the lawyer who had hired her, but reached only a voicemail. She left a detailed message about the discovery and the current situation, including the police involvement. That night, in a hotel room far from both the workshop and Lysander's vacation home, Florence finally allowed herself to process the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. Her own ancestor had committed mass murder for profit, and a century later, Lysander Grimm had been prepared to continue that legacy of violence to protect his family name and claim the valuable artifacts. "Mom?" Valerie's voice came softly. "I keep thinking about those people, trapped underground like that. It's so horrible." "It is," Florence agreed. "And I'm so sorry you were drawn into this, Val, especially through Lysander. I feel so stupid. He was just using me the whole time." "You weren't stupid," Florence said. "He was calculating and manipulative. He targeted you specifically because of our family connection, but I brought him into our lives. If anything had happened to you or Caspian because of him—" "Nothing happened," Florence assured her. "We're safe, and now the truth about what happened to the Stellar Main Circus will finally be known. Do you think Lysander is—" "I don't know. The rescue teams are doing everything they can." Despite her words, Florence had seen the grim faces of the rescue workers. The collapse had been catastrophic, with the century-old chamber essentially imploding under its own weight once the supports failed. If Lysander had survived, it would be miraculous. The next morning brought news. Rescue crews had located one of Lysander's associates, injured but alive in a pocket of space near the stairs. Of Lysander himself and the second man, there was still no sign. The police had been busy overnight as well. The detective who had taken their statements arrived at the hotel with updates. "We've authenticated the diary and some of the other documents," he informed Florence. "Experts confirm they're genuinely from the 1920s. We've also run background on Lysander Grimm." He consulted his notes. "He comes from a wealthy New England family with a private collection of medical artifacts and circus memorabilia. His great-grandfather was indeed Dr. Magnus Grimm, who became a prominent physician after 1926. "And the lawyer who hired me?" Florence asked. "That's where it gets interesting," the detective replied. "The firm exists, but they're very tight-lipped about their client. They've confirmed only that their instructions were to hire you specifically because of your Thorne family connection and your restoration expertise. So someone wanted a Thorne descendant to find what was buried under that workshop," Florence mused. "But who and why?" "There is one lead. The law firm mentioned that their client is elderly and has been searching for information about the Stellarmain Brothers Circus for decades. Apparently, there's a personal connection. A descendant of one of the performers? Someone who escaped?" "Possibly," the detective acknowledged. "We're trying to arrange a meeting through the lawyers. In the meantime, the site has been declared a historical crime scene. Archaeological experts are being brought in to properly excavate what remains of the chamber and document everything." Over the next week, the story of the Stellarmain Brothers Circus and its tragic fate captivated the nation. News outlets ran features on traveling circuses of the 1920s, the vulnerability of such performers to exploitation, and the power of wealthy industrialists like Theodore Thorne to literally bury their crimes. Experts carefully excavated the partially collapsed chamber, recovering more wagons, personal effects, and eventually human remains. DNA testing would be required to identify them, but the presence of children's remains confirmed the horror of what Theodore Thorne and Dr. Magnus Grimm had done. Lysander's body was finally recovered on the 8th day near the sideshow wagon. He had been crushed by falling timbers while clutching a small leather case that contained what appeared to be medical specimens, the curiosities from Dr. Grimm's cabinet. Florence felt a complex mix of emotions at the news of his death: horror at the tragedy, relief that he could no longer threaten her family, and a deep sadness for Valerie, who despite everything was struggling with guilt and grief. It's okay to have complicated feelings about him. They had extended their stay indefinitely as the investigation continued and media interest remained high. He deceived you, used you, and ultimately threatened us. But you cared for him once, and it's natural to mourn what you thought you had. I keep thinking about what drove him to this. To be so obsessed with finding these things that he'd threaten people, risk lives. It's like the past had a hold on him that he couldn't break. Legacy is powerful, Florence agreed. Look at us. We never knew about Theodore Thorne's crimes, but they've been shadowing our family for generations. Now we have to decide what to do with that knowledge. We tell the truth, Caspian said. Always. Yes, but it's rarely simple. Our family built its fortune on stolen lives. What does that mean for us now? Before either child could answer, Florence's phone rang. It was the detective. Miss Thorne, he said. The lawyer representing the anonymous client who hired you has made contact. His client would like to meet with you today if possible. Who is it? Her name is Eleanor Stellar-Main Martinez, the detective replied. She's 89 years old and claims to be the granddaughter of Luna Stellar-Main, the young aerialist who documented the crimes. Luna survived? According to Miss Stellar-Main Martinez, yes. Her grandmother escaped the underground chamber and spent years gathering evidence against Theodore Thorne and Dr. Grimm. But as a teenage girl with no resources, she was unable to bring them to justice. She eventually married and had children, but never stopped searching for the location where the rest of her family was buried. And Eleanor continued the search, Florence murmured. She hired me because I'm a Thorne. She knew the connection to the workshop. That appears to be the case, the detective confirmed. She's requested to meet you at her hotel. I can accompany you, if you'd prefer. No, Florence decided. After hanging up, she explained the situation to Valerie and Caspian. We should all go, Valerie said immediately. Caspian nodded in agreement. Besides, I want to hear Luna's story firsthand. She's like the hero of this whole tragedy. Florence considered their request. You're right, we'll go together. Eleanor Stellar-Main Martinez was waiting for them in the sitting area of a modest hotel suite. Despite her advanced age, she sat with perfect posture in a wheelchair. Her white hair elegantly styled, her dark eyes sharp and alert. On the table beside her lay a familiar object, a tarnished pin bearing the Stellar-Main emblem. Florence Thorne, Eleanor said, and these must be your children. Please, sit down. We have much to discuss. Florence and her children settled on the sofa across from Eleanor, an invisible weight of history hanging between them. I owe you an explanation, Eleanor began, and perhaps an apology for drawing you into this situation without full disclosure. But I needed a Thorne to find what was hidden beneath that workshop. It seemed fitting. You knew what was down there? Florence asked. Not precisely, but I knew something was buried there. My grandmother, Luna, spoke of it often. She was 16 when it happened, an aerialist with the circus and niece to the owners, the Stellar-Main brothers. According to her account, she had discovered a small access tunnel behind the sideshow wagon, an air shaft of sorts. When Theodore Thorne's men began sealing the main entrance, she escaped through this tunnel, taking only what documentation she could carry. Luna's metal box, Florence murmured. Yes, she spent months hiding, terrified that Thorne or Dr. Grimm would discover she had survived. Eventually, she made her way to another state, changed her name, and tried to build a new life. But she never stopped trying to expose what had happened. Why couldn't she get justice? Caspian asked. A 16-year-old girl with no money, no family, and a story about wealthy, respected men committing mass murder? In 1926, she approached a newspaper once, but they dismissed her as hysterical. A police officer threatened to have her committed to an asylum when she showed him her sketches. So she just gave up? Valerie sounded dismayed. Adapted. She married a kind man named Martinez who believed her story. She had children, my father and aunt, and she passed down everything she knew, all her documentation, and most importantly, the mission to someday find where her family was buried and give them proper recognition. When my father died, I inherited Luna's quest. I've spent decades tracing property records, interviewing elderly residents of the area, consulting historians. When I discovered that Theodore Thorne's old workshop still stood and was owned by a development company planning to demolish it, I knew I had to act quickly. So, you anonymously commissioned me to restore it, Florence concluded. Yes. I researched you thoroughly. Your restoration work, your Thorne ancestry, your ethical reputation. I believed you would handle the discovery properly. Eleanor's sharp eyes studied Florence. And you did, despite considerable personal risk. There was only one right choice, she said quietly. To honor the truth, however painful. That's precisely why I chose you. She reached for a folder on the table beside her. Now we must discuss what happens next. The authorities are treating this as a historical crime scene, but eventually decisions will need to be made about the artifacts recovered and the remains of my family. What would you like to see happen? I want them remembered, Eleanor said simply, not as circus freaks or anonymous victims, but as people who lived and worked and loved, who had names and dreams and talents, who deserved better than to be erased from history by wealthy men who coveted what they had. She opened the folder, revealing old photographs of circus performers in costume, smiling faces preserved in sepia tones. This is my family, the Stellarmanes, the Fisks, the Weisses, all of them. I want the world to know who they were. They deserve to be honored, Florence agreed, and my family needs to acknowledge its role in what happened to them. You are not responsible for Theodore Thorne's crimes. No, Florence acknowledged, but I am responsible for how I respond to learning from them. My family built its wealth on stolen lives. I can't change that history, but I can help ensure it's truthfully told. They talked for hours, Eleanor sharing Luna's stories of circus life, the personalities of the performers, the dreams they had held. Florence, Valerie, and Caspian listened, absorbing the human reality behind the tragedy they had uncovered. By the time they left, a plan had begun to take shape. Not just for the proper handling of the physical evidence and remains, but for a permanent memorial that would honor the Stellarmanes circus and ensure their story was never forgotten again. In the weeks that followed, the legal battles began. Lysander's family emerged from the shadows, represented by high-powered attorneys who sought to claim ownership of the circus artifacts as historical collectibles rightfully purchased by Dr. Magnus Grimm. They attempted to discredit Magdalena's diary and Luna's documentation as fabrications, even as archaeological evidence from the chamber supported the account of imprisonment and death. Florence found herself at the center of a storm of depositions, hearings, and media scrutiny. Theodore Thorne's reputation was posthumously dismantled as historians re-examined his sudden prosperity in 1926. Business holdings that had benefited from his crimes, including Florence's modest inheritance, came under ethical scrutiny. Through it all, Florence stood firm in her commitment to the truth. When offered a settlement by the Grimm family lawyers, a substantial sum in exchange for her silence, she refused. When distant Thorne relatives urged her to protect the family name, she declined. When media outlets offered exclusive rights to her story, she redirected them to the facts about the Stellarmanes circus themselves. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Valerie asked. "The Grimm lawyers are saying you could be liable for defamation of historical figures." "They're bluffing," Florence replied calmly. Caspian, who had become increasingly interested in forensic archaeology during the investigation, looked up from his laptop. "The university team says they've identified all the remains now. DNA matching with Eleanor's samples confirmed it. They were all there, everyone on Magdalena's company roster." Florence nodded. "Then it's time for the next phase." The next phase was Florence's proposal for the workshop site, a permanent memorial garden that would honor each member of the Stellar Main Brothers' traveling wonder show. She had been working with Eleanor and a team of designers to create a space that would tell the circus's story, display salvaged artifacts in a respectful manner, and provide a final resting place for the remains of those who had died. The proposal met with resistance from multiple quarters: the property developers who owned the land, historical preservation committees who wanted the workshop itself maintained, and the Grimm family, who continued to fight for possession of the circus artifacts. But Florence was resolute, and public opinion was firmly on the side of honoring the victims. In a pivotal court hearing, Florence took the stand to explain her vision for the memorial. Across the courtroom sat representatives of the Grimm family, their expressions cold and calculating, so reminiscent of Lysander that Florence felt a chill. "Mrs. Thorne," the prosecutor began, "please explain to the court why you believe the workshop should be removed and replaced with this memorial garden." Florence took a deep breath. "The workshop was built by Theodore Thorne, my great-grandfather, and was used to conceal his crimes. It stands as a monument to murder and theft. And you're willing to fund this memorial yourself?" "Yes," Florence confirmed. "The Stellar Main Brothers Circus and their performers deserve to be remembered, not hidden away beneath a building that represents their imprisonment. It seems appropriate that wealth that originated in their murders should finally serve to honor their memory. Using the restoration fee paid by Eleanor Stellarmain Martinez, along with my own savings, and if necessary the proceeds from selling my share of Thorne family holdings." The Grimm family lawyer rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Thorne, isn't it true that your proposal would permanently deny the public access to valuable historical artifacts, items that could be better preserved and displayed in a proper museum setting?" "The artifacts will be preserved and displayed," Florence countered, "but as part of the memorial in context with the names and stories of those who owned them, not as curiosities or collectibles separated from their human significance." "And who would determine what constitutes proper context?" the lawyer pressed. "The memorial design includes input from museum curators, historians, and most importantly, the sole surviving descendant of the victims," Florence replied steadily. "You, Miss Stellarmain Martinez? Neither of you has professional museum credentials. I believe that gives it more legitimacy than a private collection assembled by the descendants of those who committed the murders." "Mrs. Thorne," the lawyer continued, his tone hardening, "isn't this entire proposal simply an attempt to assuage your own guilt over your ancestors' actions? A public relations exercise to rehabilitate the Thorne name? If I wanted to protect the Thorne name, sir, I would have accepted your client's settlement offer. I would have helped conceal these crimes, just as my great-grandfather did. Instead, I'm choosing to acknowledge the truth, however painful, and to honor those who deserved better than they received." She glanced toward where Eleanor sat in her wheelchair. "This isn't about the Thorne name, it's about the Stellarmain names, the Fisk names, and the Weiss names. It's about acknowledging that they were loved, they had names, and they deserved better." In the end, the court ruled in favor of Florence and Eleanor's proposal. The workshop would be carefully dismantled, with historically significant elements preserved. The underground chamber would be properly excavated by archaeological experts, and the site would be transformed into the Stellarmain Memorial Garden, with areas dedicated to each performer and aspects of circus life. On the courthouse steps, after the ruling, Florence found herself face to face with Eleanor, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "My grandmother would be proud," Eleanor said softly. "She spent her life trying to tell their story, to make people remember. Now finally they will be honored as they should have been." Florence took the elderly woman's hands in hers. "I can't undo what my great-grandfather did, but I can help ensure the truth is known and remembered. That's all any of us can do with the legacy we inherit. Choose how we honor it or how we change it." As Florence helped Eleanor to her car, she reflected on those words. Legacy. What Theodore Thorne had left behind was a foundation built on stolen lives and silenced voices. But perhaps what Florence could leave was different. A commitment to truth, to acknowledgement, to setting right what could still be addressed, even a century later. 1 year later, Florence stood at the entrance to the Stellar-Main Memorial Garden as final preparations were made for the dedication ceremony. Where Theodore Thorne's workshop had once stood, a thoughtfully designed landscape now spread before her, pathways winding through garden spaces, each dedicated to a member of the circus company. The transformation had not been easy. The legal battles with the Grimm family had continued for months, ultimately ending in a settlement that allowed Florence and Eleanor to proceed with the memorial while acknowledging the historical significance of Doc Grimm's medical documentation, which would be preserved in a university archive with full context about how it had been obtained. The archaeological excavation of the chamber had been painstaking, yielding more artifacts and personal belongings that helped tell the story of the Stellar-Main Circus's final days. Each item had been carefully catalogued, preserved, and incorporated into the memorial's small museum space, which occupied a purpose-built structure at the garden's edge. The remains of the circus members had been formally interred in a central memorial area, with stones bearing their names, ages, and roles in the circus. Eleanor had provided photographs where available, ensuring that visitors would see the faces of those who had been lost. "It's beautiful," Valerie said, joining Florence at the entrance. At 19, she had spent her gap year before college helping with the memorial project, finding healing in the work of honoring the dead. "Do you think they would approve?" Florence looked around at the colorful flower beds, the restored circus wagons displayed under protective canopies, and the flowing fountain at the center of the memorial space. "I hope so." Eleanor says it captures the spirit of what the circus was, vibrant, welcoming, full of life. Caspian approached, clipboard in hand, but a voice from the past, persistent and urgent, shattered the stillness of Rachel's new life. It was Victor. His words were a frantic jumble, a desperate plea for help, for understanding. He spoke of things she barely remembered, a buried truth from their shared history that now threatened to consume him. Rachel, a determined woman in her 30s with auburn hair, found herself drawn back into the shadowy world she'd fought so hard to escape. Her quiet resolve was replaced by a familiar unease, a chilling premonition of the danger that lay ahead. The past, it seemed, wasn't content to remain buried. The truth may be painful, but concealing it only compounds the original wrong. And what about the Grimm family? There are rumors they continue to possess other circus artifacts that Dr. Magnus Grimm acquired. The settlement agreement prevents me from speculating about that. What I know is that the items recovered from this site are now properly preserved and contextualized, honoring those who originally owned them. The past speaks to the present, if we listen carefully. The Stellar-Main circus performers were vulnerable because they were outsiders, because they lived unconventional lives, because their value was seen in what they could provide rather than in their humanity. Those patterns persist. Perhaps by acknowledging historical injustices honestly, we become more attentive to similar patterns in our own time. After the reporter departed, Florence found herself approached by a young woman in her 20s, who had been hovering nearby during the interview. It was taken around 1924, before David was born. "I thought perhaps it could be added to their memorial stones." "Thank you," Florence said, emotion tightening her throat. "This will be a precious addition to their memorial." Throughout the afternoon, similar encounters occurred. Descendants of circus performers or circus families coming forward with stories, photographs, or simply gratitude that the Stellar-Main Company was finally being honored. Valerie and Caspian were helping staff close the museum space for the night. Florence found herself alone in the central memorial area. As dusk fell, solar-powered lights along the pathways gradually illuminated, creating a gentle, dreamlike atmosphere. Florence looked up to see Eleanor being wheeled toward her, a bouquet of white roses in her lap. Despite having attended the entire dedication ceremony earlier, The elderly woman had returned, drawn back to this place of culmination. I wanted to see it at twilight, Eleanor explained. My grandmother Luna said the circus was most magical at this hour, when the lanterns were just lit, when the ordinary world faded and the wonder began. Together, they watched as the memorial garden transformed in the gathering darkness. The pathway lights created pools of gentle illumination. The restored circus wagons, their colors muted by dusk, took on an otherworldly quality. Eleanor placed the white roses at the base of the stone. For you, grandmother, she said softly. As if in response to her words, a light snow began to fall. The first of the season, delicate flakes drifting down to dust the memorial garden in white. Florence helped Eleanor back into her wheelchair, and they sat in companionable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the memorial stones, on the pathways, on the circus wagons. The first peaceful winter this ground has known in a century, Eleanor observed. Florence nodded, understanding the significance. No longer a place of concealment and forgotten crimes, the earth beneath them had been cleansed by truth, by acknowledgement, by the simple act of speaking names that had been deliberately erased. But there had been other choices too. Luna Stellarmain had chosen courage and witness. Eleanor had chosen persistence and memory. And Florence had chosen truth and acknowledgement, even at personal cost. Mom, Caspian approached. Valerie and I were thinking maybe we could make this an annual tradition, coming here on the dedication day no matter where we all end up in the future.